Late summer had turned Cedar Hollow into a land of cracks and dust. The riverbed behind Boone Carver's ranch was nothing but a scar in the earth, dry, split, and silent. The air shimmered with heat. Even the horses moved more slowly, their ribs showing under coats dulled by drought. Boone stood at the fence line, hat tilted low, watching the sun burn itself down behind the ridge. He'd once loved this view, gold light over good land. Now it only reminded him of loss. His pride had built this place. His pride had kept him standing when his fiancée rode away with a banker from Abilene, leaving Boone with nothing but a ring box and a name people whispered with pity. Since then, Boone Carver had learned to live quietly. Pride, he told himself, was better company than people. That evening, the ranch had gone still early. The men had gone to town chasing beer and cards. Only the wind and the creak of the stable doors kept him company as Boone crossed the yard. He'd meant to check the feed levels. Another shipment was delayed, but the moment he stepped inside, he froze. Someone was crying. The sound was faint at first, a hitching breath, a stifled sob, but it came from the far stall. Boone's hand brushed the stable lamp, its light spilling over straw and shadow until it found her. Mayra Dean, the new stable hand he'd hired just 2 weeks back. Young but not fragile. She worked hard, didn't talk much, and had that worn look folks got when life had taught them not to expect kindness. Now she sat in the straw, back against a post, a torn letter clutched in her hands. Boone hesitated. He wasn't good with tears. Hadn't been since his mother died and his father told him, "A Carver man doesn't cry, son. He fixes." He shifted his weight, scuffing a boot against the dirt. The sound made her look up fast, eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Mr. Carver, I didn't hear you come in." Boone cleared his throat. "Didn't mean to sneak up." She scrambled to her feet, tucking the letter into her pocket like it was something shameful. "I'm sorry, sir. Won't happen again." Boone opened his mouth to say something, anything, but all that came out was a quiet grunt. He turned, meaning to leave her to her privacy, but as he walked away, the sound of her muffled crying started again. That night, Boone couldn't sleep. The wind scratched against the window like it wanted to come in. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, long and lonely. He stared at the ceiling and tried to push the sound of her crying out of his mind. He didn't know what business her troubles were of his. He'd hired her to muck stalls and tend horses, not to weep in his barn. Still, he couldn't shake the image of that letter in her hands, torn at the fold, ink smudged where tears had fallen. The next morning, Boone went about his chores earlier than usual. The sun hadn't cleared the hills yet when he found Mayra already at work, pitchfork in hand, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Her eyes were puffy, but her movements were steady. He said nothing, just nodded, and she nodded back. Later, when the ranch hands rolled in from town, they cast curious glances at her. One of them, a lean man named Dugan, leaned against a post and muttered, "Heard tell she's from over in Bellwater. Folks there don't speak kindly of her." Boone ignored him, but the word stuck. Rumors traveled faster than rainfall around here. By noon, the heat had turned merciless. Boone found himself watching Mayra work with a quiet sort of irritation, half respect, half confusion. She didn't flinch from hard labor, didn't whine, didn't slow. It was as though she had something to prove, not to him, but to herself. And yet, now and then she'd pause, fingertips brushing the pocket where that letter was hidden. Her jaw would tighten and she'd keep going. That night, as Boone walked past the stable again, he caught himself glancing toward the same stall. Empty now, just straw and shadows, but something in him knew. That girl's tears weren't just sorrow. They were a secret. And secrets, he'd learned, had a way of changing a man's peace faster than any drought ever could. 2 days passed before Boone heard the first whisper about Mayra Dean. He'd ridden into town to check on a late delivery of feed, only to find old Mrs. Penner and the storekeeper leaning close behind the counter, voices low as flies in molasses. They stopped talking when Boone walked in, which told him plenty. Mrs. Penner gave him a thin smile. Heard you hired yourself a girl from Bellwater, she said. Pretty thing. Shame what happened to her, Boone grunted. What's that supposed to mean? The storekeeper scratched at his jaw, pretending to stack tins. Folks say she caused trouble up that way. Got herself tangled with a man who wasn't hers. When his wife found out, she had to leave town. Boone's jaw tightened. You folks got time to gossip. Maybe you've got time to help me load feed. They didn't meet his eyes after that. By the time he rode home, the sun had gone hard and white overhead. The drought had turned the land brittle as bone. Every hoofbeat kicked up dust that hung in the air like smoke. At the ranch, Boone found Mara repairing a corral post, her hair tied back, face streaked with sweat and dust. Dean, he called, dismounting. That post needs fixing that bad? Yes, sir. She hammered one more nail, tested the rail, and wiped her forehead. Couldn't stand watching the colt slip through. Boone studied her. She didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't even pause. Just went back to work. You from Bellwater? He asked. She froze, hammer mid-swing. Then softly, I was. Folks there say things. She set the hammer down and straightened. They do. Boone waited for her to explain. She didn't. Finally, she looked at him, steady and tired. All I'll say is this, Mr. Carver. I ain't a liar and I ain't a thief. I just need honest work. If that's too much trouble, I'll be gone before sundown. Her voice didn't tremble. Boone felt his pride rise like a wall. He'd been burned before by people who wore masks, people who smiled and lied through their teeth. He wanted to tell her to pack her things, to keep his ranch clean of trouble. But something in her eyes stopped him. There was no deceit there, just hurt worn down to plain endurance. He exhaled. You do good work. That's what counts here. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Then she nodded, silent as ever. That evening, Boone sat by the paddock fence, watching the sky bruise purple. Mara crossed the yard carrying water buckets. The handle bit into her palms, but she didn't slow. The men at the bunkhouse door fell quiet as she passed. Dugan spat in the dirt. Don't take much to know what kind she is, he muttered to the others. She'll cry her way into the boss's favor before long. Boone stood and fixed him with a stare that could split oak. You got something worth saying, Dugan, say it to me. Dugan's smirk faltered. Just talking, boss. Then stop talking. Silence settled over the yard. When Boone turned, he caught Mara glancing back just once. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only quiet understanding. That night, Boone found himself at the stable again, checking on a mare due to foal soon. The scent of hay and sweat filled the air. He saw Mara asleep against a bale, her jacket folded under her head. The lamplight softened her face, made her look younger, almost peaceful. A torn scrap of the letter lay near her boot. He recognized the same paper as before. He bent to pick it up, meaning to toss it aside, but his eyes caught on the ink. You've no right to write me again, it read, in a man's heavy hand. You made your bed when you opened your mouth. My wife believes your lies. She'll ruin you yet. Boone let the scrap fall. Whatever truth lay behind those words, he knew this. The woman in his stable wasn't scheming. She was surviving. He stepped outside into the dry night, stars sharp as nails overhead. Pride told him to stay out of her business, but some part of him, quieter, older, whispered that a man's measure wasn't in how proud he stood, but in who he stood up for. And for the first time in years, Boone Carver wasn't sure which side of that measure he was on. By the next morning, the air felt different, cooler, restless, as though the wind itself carried warning. Boone woke early as always and found Mara already in the yard. She moved like someone with purpose, feeding, sweeping, fixing what needed fixing without a word wasted. He watched from the porch a moment, coffee steaming in his hand. Most new hands worked hard for a week, then slowed once the pay came due, not her. She was steady, almost stubborn. Boone couldn't decide if that steadiness impressed him or unsettled him. Later that week, a colt took sick. The young ranch hands muttered that it wouldn't make it through the night, not in this heat. Boone sent for the vet in town, but word came back that he was 3 days out on another job. By the time Boone made it to the stable, Mara was already there with a bucket of cool water and a rag, wiping the sweat from the colt's neck. "She's got a fever," Mara said without looking up. "I know," Boone replied. "Ain't much we can do till help gets here." "There's always something to do," she murmured. "My pa used to say that." Boone leaned on the stall rail, watching her work. She mixed crushed willow bark into the water and coaxed the colt to drink. He'd never shown her how to treat a fever, but she handled the animal like she'd done it 100 times before. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "From someone who didn't think much of doctors," she said with a faint smile. "But she kept most of her horses alive anyway." Boone said nothing, but the thought stuck with him. By morning, the colt's fever had broken. When Boone told her she'd done good work, Mara just nodded and went back to mucking stalls. No pride, no gloating, just the quiet rhythm of someone who found peace in being useful. A few days later, Boone found her in the equipment shed, bent over an old saddle. His father's saddle, the one Boone hadn't touched since the funeral. The leather was cracked, the horn was half broken, and the stitching was nearly gone. He opened his mouth to tell her to leave it be, but she looked up first. "It was going to rot if I didn't," she said simply. "Figured your pa wouldn't want that." Boone's throat tightened. For a long moment he couldn't find the words. "You knew my father?" "No, sir," she said softly. "But I've heard how folks talk about him. Hard man, fair man. I thought maybe he taught you to mend things instead of tossing them." Boone stared at the saddle, now cleaned and half-oiled. "He did. Then I just followed suit. There wasn't much a man could say to that." That night, after the rest of the ranch had gone quiet, Boone walked back to the stable. He didn't know why, habit maybe, or something deeper. The moon hung low, light spilling silver across the straw. He found Mara there again, seated in the same spot where he'd first found her crying. The torn letter lay open beside her. Boone stopped at the stall door. "You're up late." "Couldn't sleep," she said without turning. He leaned against the post. "Is that the same letter?" She nodded, fingers tightening on the paper. Boone hesitated, then crossed the space between them. The air was thick with hay and unspoken things. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "Ain't my business." Mara's laugh was small, hollow. "Maybe not. But it seems to follow me anyway." She drew a shaky breath. "That letter, it's from the man who ruined my name." Boone said nothing, just listened. He said if I came back to Bellwater, he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of woman I was. Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "The only thing I ever did wrong was believe he meant to marry me. When I told the truth, his wife called me a liar. The rest of the town did too." Boone swallowed. "You didn't have to tell me that." "I know," she whispered. "But I wanted to. You're the only one who's treated me like I'm not dirty." The words hit harder than he expected. He sat down beside her, straw creaking under his weight. "Pride'll keep a person thirsty longer than drought ever could," he said after a moment. "Maybe that's what I've been drinking all these years." For the first time, she smiled, small, trembling, but real. They sat in silence after that. Two souls bound by what they'd lost and what they hadn't yet dared to hope for. Outside, a warm wind rustled through the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of rain. And for the first time in months, Boone Carver didn't feel alone in his own barn. The days that followed moved with a strange kind of peace. Hard work, but lighter somehow. Boone didn't say much, but something in him had eased. Maybe it was the rain that finally came, light but steady. Maybe it was the way Mara smiled when she worked, as though each sunrise was a second chance. The drought broke, bit by bit. Grass began to green along the creek bed, and the herd found energy again. The ranch, his father's ranch, started to breathe, and Boone, to his own surprise, began to look forward to conversation. One morning, as the sun stretched over the valley, Mara rode back from checking the south pasture. Her hair was tangled with the wind, her cheeks pink from the ride. Boone stood by the corral mending a gate hinge. Fence lines holding, she reported. But the back troughs cracked clean through. Add it to the list, Boone said. We'll patch it this evening. She smiled faintly. You mean I'll patch it and you'll say you were fixin' to? Boone smirked despite himself. You talk bold for someone still on probation. I work bold too, she said, tightening her grip on the reins. Boone watched her ride off again, dust rising behind her horse. There was strength in her seat, grace in the way she handled the reins. Not delicate, honest. By late afternoon, the two of them were repairing the trough together. Boone poured the sealant while Mayra steadied the cracked wood. Their hands brushed once, quick and unplanned, but the air between them shifted all the same. Thank you for letting me stay, she said quietly after a while. You didn't have to. Boone looked up. I reckon I did. Anyone can swing a hammer. Not everyone swings it honestly. Her eyes met his, uncertain at first, then warm. That means you believe me? I don't know much about your past, Boone admitted. But I know you don't hide from work, and lies don't hold up well under sweat. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the sound of hammering and the low hum of cicadas filled the yard. When they finished, Boone leaned back on the fence, watching the last light catch in the dust. You ever think about leaving this place behind? Starting fresh somewhere no one knows your name? Mayra wiped her hands on her apron. Thought about it every day for a year. But wherever I went, I was still me. And you can't outrun the truth, not the good part of it anyway. Boone nodded slowly. My father used to say a man's shadow follows him even when he rides west. Your father sounds like he carried a few himself. He did. I got mine honest. That night, a low storm rolled across the plains. Thunder grumbled far off and lightning split the horizon like a plow cutting soil. Boone stood in the stable doorway watching the rain sheet down. Mayra was there too, spreading dry hay for the horses. She looked up and said softly, Funny thing about storms. People think they ruin everything, but sometimes they just clean what needs cleaning. Boone turned to her, his face lit in flashes of white. You're talking about the rain. Maybe, she said. Maybe not. He laughed once, quietly and low. You've got a way of talking that makes a man think. That a good thing or a bad one? He thought about it. Guess I'll know come morning. The next morning dawned fresh and sharp, the air rinsed clean. The smell of wet soil filled the yard. Boone stepped outside and saw Mayra brushing one of the mares, humming under her breath. Something inside him stirred, something patient, waiting, long buried under pride and silence. He realized he'd started trusting her, not just with the work, but with the quiet parts of himself he hadn't let anyone near since the betrayal. The drought had broken. Sure, but maybe something else had too. That evening, Boone found Mayra sitting by the porch steps, whittling a piece of driftwood smooth. The dying light caught her face just so, soft and sure. Funny, she said without looking up. When I came here, I thought the only thing I'd do was prove I wasn't a liar. Never thought I'd find peace instead. Boone sat beside her. Peace doesn't come easy. Maybe that's why it's worth something. For a long while they said nothing. The ranch hummed around them. The creak of the windmill, the drip of rain from the eaves, the steady rhythm of a place healing. And somewhere in that stillness, Boone realized something had shifted. This wasn't just his ranch anymore. It was theirs, rebuilt on sweat, trust, and a truth neither of them had dared speak aloud. Not yet, but soon. The first hint of trouble came with a dust trail on the horizon. 3 riders kicking up the dry road toward the ranch. Boone saw them from the porch, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. When they drew near, he recognized the lead man's swagger long before he heard the voice. Boone Carver, Clay Danner called, sliding off his horse with a grin too wide to mean anything good. Heard you've been hiring help out of Bellwater. Thought I'd stop by and see if it's the same gal I knew. Boone's shoulders tightened. Ain't none of your concern who I hire, Danner. Oh, I think it is, Danner said, brushing dust off his coat. Folks deserve to know who they're working beside, especially when that person's got a history. The other men laughed low, mean Boone's jaw clenched. You best say what you came to say, Clay. Danner tilted his hat. I'll save you the surprise then. That girl, Mara Dean, she's no saint. Ran off from Bellwater after shaming a good man's name. Can't say I blame the fella. She's got a way of crying just right when she wants something. Boone didn't answer right away. His silence was sharp as barbed wire. Finally, he said, You done? Not hardly, Danner smirked. Town'll hear soon enough. I just figured you'd want to know who you're sheltering before they start talking. He mounted up, dust swirling around his boots. Watch yourself, Boone. Pride's one thing. But a ruined woman? That's another. By the next morning, the damage had begun. Boone could feel the shift in the air before a word was spoken. Ranch hands worked more slowly, glancing at Mara like she carried disease. Lunch chatter turned to whispers. The warmth that had built up in those weeks vanished like dew under the sun. Mara felt it too. He could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she stopped humming while she worked. That evening she approached him by the barn, her face pale, eyes dark with hurt. You heard it, didn't you? Boone hesitated. I did. Then you should fire me, she said flatly, before the rest of them walk out. I don't fire good hands over gossip. This isn't gossip, Mr. Carver. Her voice cracked. It's my life, and folks will believe what they want. He ran a hand over his jaw, struggling for words. You said before you told the truth. That's all that matters, she shook her head. Not out here. Truth doesn't feed horses or stop tongues. Boone's pride, old and stubborn, rose like a reflex. The thought of being judged, of his men thinking he was soft, twisted inside him. I can't afford to lose this crew, he said finally. Not with winter coming. Mara took a small step back, her voice barely above a whisper. So you want me gone? I want you safe, he said. You stay. They'll make your life hell. I've already lived through worse. Mara. She stopped him with a shake of her head. You told me pride keeps a person thirsty. Guess you're still drinking. Boone flinched at that, because she was right. The next morning she was gone from the bunkhouse. Her few belongings were packed neatly in a saddlebag beside the gate. Boone told himself it was for the best, that she'd find work somewhere quiet, start over again. But the ranch felt hollow without her. The rhythm was off. The horses were restless. Even the wind sounded lonelier. That evening, as he crossed the yard, he found Dugan and the other hands talking low. The word Bellwater caught in the air like a burr. Boone snapped, You boys think you know what happened? You don't. So, unless gossip starts fixing fences, I suggest you shut your mouths. They fell silent, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. That night, the storm rolled in. One of those black, rolling tempests that seemed to come from the earth itself. The wind howled across the plains, bending trees and rattling shutters. Boone stood on the porch, rain slashing across the yard, lightning flashing white over the hills. The air stank of ozone and regret. He thought of Mara out there riding into that storm alone. Thought of her last words, how his pride had kept him thirsty, and as thunder split the sky. Boone Carver realized that for the first time since his fiancée left him, he wasn't just angry at the world, he was ashamed of himself. The storm came down like judgment. By midnight, rain had turned the yard into a lake and the wind howled through the rafters like it meant to tear the place apart. Boone fought to hold the barn doors shut, soaked to the bone, mud sucking at his boots. Lightning split the sky, white and furious. Inside, the horses screamed and kicked their stalls, wild-eyed with fear. One of the mares, Daisy, was due to foal any day, and Boone's heart sank as he realized the worst. Her stall was empty. He grabbed a lantern and ran toward the pasture, rain slapping his face, the wind nearly ripping the handle from his grasp. The world had turned to chaos. Mud, thunder, flashes of light that showed only pieces of the truth at a time. Daisy, he shouted, his voice lost in the roar. Come on, girl. Then, through the flash of lightning, he saw her, a pale shape in the flooded pasture thrashing in the muck. The foal was coming. Boone stumbled forward, nearly falling as water surged around his legs. He tried to calm the mare, but she was panicked, the storm screaming over them both. He needed another set of hands. A shout cut through the wind. Boone! He turned, disbelief catching in his chest. Mara. She was half-drenched, hair plastered to her face, eyes fierce. She slogged through the mud toward him, clutching a rope and a blanket. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he shouted. "Couldn't leave you to drown yourself and her," she yelled back. "Hold her steady." There was no time for pride now. Together they knelt in the flooded straw, rain hammering down as Mara wrapped her arms around the mare's neck. Boone worked fast, clearing the muck, guiding the foal into the world. It was brutal, backbreaking work, every flash of lightning showing their faces streaked with sweat, rain, and resolve. Boone's muscles screamed, his knees sank deep in the mire. "Push, girl," he murmured, voice rough. "You got this." Mara kept whispering to the mare, steady as prayer. "You're not alone, Daisy, you hear me? You ain't alone." Then, with a shudder and a cry, the foal slipped free into Boone's hands, a small, slick thing gasping for breath. He cleared its mouth and rubbed it down with the blanket. The foal coughed, then gave a tiny, defiant whinny. For a second, the world went still. Boone laughed, a raw, breathless sound, and Mara sobbed out a shaky breath. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Boone said softly, meeting her eyes through the downpour. "We did." They both collapsed back into the straw, rain still drumming around them, their chests heaving. When the worst of the storm passed, Boone built a small fire in the stable to warm the newborn. The flickering light painted the hay gold, catching in the tears on Mara's cheeks. He looked at her, mud-streaked, trembling, alive, and something inside him broke clean open. "I told you to leave," he said quietly. "I did." She smiled faintly, "But I came back. I'm done running, Boone. Done letting other people tell my story." Boone swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have risked your life for this ranch." "I didn't," she said. "I risked it for the only man who ever looked at me and saw more than what they said I was." The words hit him like lightning, bright and searing. Boone turned away for a moment, then back again. "I thought pride kept me strong. Turns out it just kept me alone." Mara reached out, touching his arm, her hand trembling. "Then leave it here," she whispered. "In the straw, where it belongs." He looked down, the mud, the foal, the straw sticking to his boots, and nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time." Outside, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Dawn broke over the hills, pale and fragile, painting the world silver. Boone and Mara stood side by side, watching the foal take its first shaky steps. Boone exhaled, voice low. "Never thought I'd see a day start looking this clean." Mara smiled. "That's the thing about storms, Boone. They break what's brittle, but they leave what's worth keeping." He looked at her then, really looked, and in her eyes he saw not the broken woman from Bellwater, but the strongest soul he'd ever known. And as the light touched them both, Boone Carver understood something simple and true. He'd left his pride in the straw and found something far better in its place. By the time the sun rose full, Cedar Hollow had turned to gold. The storm's wreckage glittered under the morning light, broken branches, soaked fields, the scent of clean earth rising after months of dust. Boone and Mara had worked through the dawn, mending what they could. The foal was safe beside its mother, weak but breathing steadily. The horses were calm again. For the first time in years, Boone felt light. But word in Cedar Hollow traveled faster than the wind. By midday, when Boone rode into town for supplies, heads turned. Folks watched from the boardwalks, whispers following him like burrs on his coat. He tied his horse at the feed store and stepped inside, where the usual chatter went quiet. Clay Danner stood by the counter, a bag of grain slung over his shoulder, and a grin sharp enough to cut. "Well, if it ain't the proud Mr. Carver," he drawled. "Heard you and your stable girl weathered the storm together. Must have been cozy." Laughter rippled through the store. Boone froze. His old pride, the kind that made a man grit his teeth and walk away, flared up by instinct. But it was followed by something new. Something steady, clean. He turned, voice level. "You got something worth saying, Danner. Say it plain." Clay shrugged. "Just wondering how low a carver's standards have sunk. Town says she's a liar. Bellwater says worse. You really trust a woman with a record like that?" Boone's jaw flexed. "You done talking about her?" "Not hardly." Clay leaned close, smirking. "You're defending trash, Boone. You think folks will still call you respectable after this?" The store went dead quiet. Even the clerk's hands stopped moving. Boone set his gloves on the counter, slow and deliberate. "I used to care what folks called me," he said. "Used to think a man's name meant something only if it stayed clean," Clay sneered.
"And now?"
"Now I reckon a name's worth nothing if you won't stand behind what's right." He stepped forward, eyes locked on Danner's. "You spread lies about a woman who's done nothing but work honest. Keep her head down and outwork every man on my ranch. You call her ruined, but she's the only one out here who ain't afraid to tell the truth." A murmur rolled through the room. Boone didn't raise his voice, but every word landed heavy. "So go ahead, Clay, keep talking. But you look me in the eye while you do it. You call her a liar, you call me one too, and I'll stand by her every word." Clay's smirk faltered. Boone took another step, close enough that Clay had to look away. "You want to talk about ruin, Danner? Pride ruins more men than any woman ever did. I ought to know." The store stayed silent for a long, breathless moment. Then Boone turned, tossed a coin on the counter for the grain, and walked out. Heads bowed as he passed, some in shame, some in respect. Outside, Mara was waiting by the hitching post. She'd followed him into town quietly, uncertain, her hat pulled low. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Boone stopped beside her. "Yeah, I did." Her eyes shone in the sunlight, rimmed red. "They'll talk more now. Let 'em," he said. "Talk doesn't build fences. Work does." For a moment, neither spoke. The street was hushed save for the creak of signs in the wind. Then Mara said, "You believed me, even after they didn't." Boone met her gaze. "I didn't just believe you. I saw you. And I saw myself in the lies they told. Both of us trying to live down ghosts." She smiled then, soft and trembling. "And now?" He tipped his hat toward her, a half smile breaking through. "Now I reckon we let 'em see the truth for a change." When they rode back through Cedar Hollow, folks didn't look at them the same. Some still whispered, but others nodded. The sight of Boone Carver, proud and private, riding beside a woman he'd once nearly sent away, said more than any speech could. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned to the color of honey, the fields glinting wet under the sun. Mara dismounted, staring at the land stretching wide and open. "It's beautiful after the rain," she said. Boone glanced around, then at her. "Ain't the land that changed. It's what we see in it," and with that he finally smiled. Not out of pride, but peace. The drought was gone. The shame was gone. What remained was honest ground, and the start of something that might just last. Weeks passed, and Cedar Hollow settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. The river had water again, green shoots carpeted the pastures, and the herd thrived under steady care. The ranch had become more than Boone Carver's land. It was a place alive with trust, laughter, and hard-won respect. Boone moved among the horses, checking fences, feeding grain, always with an eye on Mara. She worked beside him now as more than just a stable hand. Their movements were synchronized, handing tools, repairing gates, tending to mares and foals. No words were wasted, but when they spoke it was steady, warm, and honest. The townsfolk began to notice. Rumors of scandal were replaced with whispers of admiration. It wasn't just that Mara's reputation was untarnished, it was that Boone Carver himself had changed. Folks saw a man who admitted mistakes, defended the innocent, and trusted those who had been wronged. Respect followed them like sunlight. One afternoon, Boone leaned against the corral fence, watching Mara coax a stubborn colt into the paddock. He tipped his hat back, catching her eye. She gave a small nod, and he returned it with a smile. "You're good at this," he said. She shrugged, brushing hay from her sleeves. "You teach me well." "Maybe," Boone said, voice quiet. "Or maybe you just listen better than most." Mara laughed, soft and easy. Boone felt the sound settle in his chest, the kind of warmth that comes from knowing someone is exactly where they belong. Evenings were quiet now, often spent on the porch with mugs of coffee and the smell of rain on the horizon. Boone would watch the sun dip behind the hills, and Mara would hum a soft tune, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Words weren't necessary. Trust and partnership had become their language. Sometimes they walked the pastures together, checking fences or tending to the foals. Boone would point out weak rails. Mara would laugh and fix them faster than he could explain. One evening, as the sky turned copper and violet, Boone stopped and looked at her. "You ever think we'd get here?" Mara tilted her head, considering. "I didn't know if I'd ever get anywhere," she said softly. "But now, I see why some things take time." Boone nodded, eyes tracing the horizon. "We did it together." The ranch had become their shared triumph. Work that had once felt lonely and burdensome now carried meaning. Every fence mended, every foal nurtured, every sunrise witnessed side by side became a testament to honesty, resilience, and trust. Children passing through town waved to them. The ranch hands worked harder, inspired by the quiet, unwavering standard Boone and Mara had set. And the townsfolk, once ready to whisper, looked on with a mixture of admiration and humility. No one mentioned bellwater or gossip anymore. What they saw now was strength forged in hardship. One morning, Boone and Mara rode together across the fields, the sun casting long, soft shadows. The wind rustled the tall grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. Boone glanced at her, hat tipped low to shade his eyes. "Guess we made a pretty good team, huh?" Mara laughed, light and free. "The best I've ever had." He grinned, feeling the weight of pride he'd carried for years finally melt. "Guess we leave the rest to the land and the sky." The ranch, once a symbol of loss and loneliness, had become a sanctuary. Their partnership, built through storms, sweat, and honesty, was no longer about surviving the world. It was about thriving within it. Together. Boone Carver and Mara Dean stood at the center of the ranch yard, looking out over the fields. Hands brushed briefly, a silent promise passing between them. Here in Cedar Hollow, there was no past to haunt them, only work to be done, life to live, and hearts finally free. And for the first time, Boone realized that trust, respect, and love could grow stronger than any rumor, survive any storm, and outlast the fiercest drought. The land, the horses, the people, everything had found its balance. And so had they. Boone tipped his hat to the horizon. Mara smiled, brushing the straw from her sleeves. Together they walked back to the barn, laughter drifting across the fields. Cedar Hollow was quiet, strong, and alive. And so were they. If you felt Boone and Mara's journey, hit like and subscribe for more heartfelt Wild West tales. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story that tugs at the heart.